Welcome to Fans Fight Back. Myself, Martin Theobald, on the Pitch Boxing app. It's a week where the heavyweights take the headlines. From the weekend just gone, Joyce stopped Christian Hammer in the fourth round. It's a strange one with Joyce. I'm not really sure where this is going as a career at the moment. Christian Hammer is somebody that you wouldn't even class him as a gatekeeper necessarily. I know we get spun the narrative that nobody's done that to Christian Hammer in quite some time, if ever. But Christian Hammer is an aging heavyweight. He's on his way out. Joyce, he didn't need that fight for me. He's beaten better opponents than Christian Hammer. It feels like they're treading water a little bit, waiting for one of those opportunities to come along. WBO #1, but I mean, that relies upon getting the winner of Joshua versus Usyk. Do they really want Joyce? Is that something that's going to happen anytime soon? It's feeling a little bit like when Dillian Whyte was coming through. Dillian Whyte was fighting lots and lots of different contenders, some of a higher level than Christian Hammer, some arguably not. But it feels like he's going round all those circles of fighters that sit just below kind of world level. I don't feel like this does anything for Joyce. Stopping Christian Hammer in 4 rounds, I don't really understand where it's going right now, other than to sit and wait. I'd like him to be taking on better opponents than Christian Hammer. Christian Hammer, for me, just isn't worthwhile for somebody who, Joyce has got limited years left on the clock. And he was getting hit far, far too easily there. Again, Christian Hammer isn't a world-level fighter, hasn't been a world-level fighter. He shouldn't be hitting someone like Joyce as cleanly as he was. I'm assuming we're going to end up with Joyce taking on numerous other contenders. I'd like to see a Martin Bakole fight, but I fear for Joyce in that. When we saw what Bakole did to Tony Yoka, if he were to do the same to Joyce, those quick hands in and out movements, I'm not sure how Joyce deals with that. I know you see a lot of talk about, Joyce would be able to walk in, smother Usyk these days. That was a narrative being spun on the back of it. Different to their amateur fight. He'd be able to walk in, smaller gloves, smother Usyk. I don't see any way that happens. I think someone like a Martin Bakole would cause him all kinds of problems. I'm a big Joyce fan. I enjoy watching him. He's growing as a character. I don't necessarily think that as a fighter, he's progressing. Not that he's regressing either, but he needs those big fights soon. Are Frank Warren and co willing to invest in him? I don't see it. I don't see that they are. Or should have someone better than Christian Hammer, which leads to almost an obvious fight, which would be for Daniel Dubois' WBA regular title. It's easy to make. They're both Warren fighters. It's an all-British world title fight, as much as it's world title with some very strong inverted commas around it. It's a rematch. I can see it happening. I can see it happening in October, November, December time, maybe. And I'm not adverse to it either. It was a good fight first time round. Joyce kind of controlled with that jab. Dubois didn't have any answer for it. I'm up for seeing it as a rematch. However, Joyce needs something soon that is meaningful. Does going back to Daniel Dubois have the same meaning as moving onwards to Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, Aleksandar Usyk? No, it doesn't. But rather than seeing another Christian Hammer style fight, if we're going to see Joyce move elsewhere, then I'm more than happy for it to be Daniel Dubois. But this weekend coming, we've got Derek Chisora versus Pulev. A combined age of 79 years old. 79 years old. Now, I know heavyweights can go longer than their lighter weights, but 79 years old. Do we need to see two fighters aged 79 between them fighting in a rematch that nobody really called for? Nobody desired this rematch. Nobody wanted it. There was no demand for this whatsoever. The first fight, I would argue anyone to tell me the highlights of it. I watched it. I don't remember it. I don't really remember it at all. I don't get why this is happening, why it's headlining the O2, why there isn't a better undercard. The undercard has Felix Cash fighting for a European middleweight title. Okay, I'm a Felix Cash fan. I'm okay with that. It has Fabio Wardley against, I don't know who. It has Komnin Yarko. They're not fights that I'm really that interested in. It used to be that if you had a semi-dubious main event, which I think you can arguably say Chisora versus Pulev is, then you would buff up the undercard. You'd have something that made it worthwhile tuning in for the evening. They haven't done that this time round, and it'll be interesting to see how full the O2 is, how many tickets they sell, how many tiers they open, upper tier, lower tier. Let's see come Saturday night. But it's a fight that I don't understand why it's made. It does nothing for either. And I realised that neither are probably ever going to fight for a world title again. That's okay. To some degree, that's okay. I've no issue with that. Maybe let them fight up-and-coming fighters, though. Like, why are they fighting? It's two old men. It's two old men that don't have anything else to do. I'm not a fan of it at all. You've got an issue there of Chisora. He's coming off. He's lost 3 of his last 3 fights. He's lost to Usyk and he's lost twice to Parker. He's lost 3 of his last 3. He's lost 12 in his total career now. And for a man of his age, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with where it's going. I'm not sure I really need to see him up against these world level, or will be told world level fighters. Somebody like a Pulev, who is not far removed from fighting Joshua, but he never really gave a great account of himself in that fight. Do we need to see this fight? Do we need to see Pulev against Chisora? I personally don't. I personally don't need to see it again. The first fight was so unmemorable, with so little action. I don't need to see it again come Saturday night. That said, I will still watch it because we're so short on boxing action at present in the UK that I will still end up watching it. This goes back to what I said before on a previous episode about the talent being spread too thinly around the boxing world in the UK. Too many channels, not enough talent. And it's an interesting one when you then look at, over the last couple of weeks, you've ended up with Billam-Smith is going to be fighting on Sky Sports against Isaac Chamberlain at cruiserweight, which is great. I love that fight. I love that fight. I'm a real big fan of that fight. Billam-Smith, aside from his loss to Riakporhe, has had an almost faultless career. And we'd love to see that Riakporhe fight again against Billam-Smith. Isaac Chamberlain lost to Akoli and then seems to have fallen off the radar a little bit with his career. He's been in and out of broadcasters. He's done some time on Channel 5. He's had issues with his career kind of outside of the ring as much as in. But there's still a world of talent there, I truly believe, with Isaac Chamberlain. So Isaac Chamberlain against Billam-Smith, I'm really interested in that fight. But I find it interesting that it's happening on Sky Sports. Billam-Smith has built his career with Matchroom on DAZN, previously on Sky Sports. So the fact that fight has ended up on Sky Sports, is that a long-term deal for Billam-Smith, or will he end up back with DAZN? For Isaac Chamberlain, will he end up with Sky Sports? Now, he was signed with Hennessy previously. That was on Channel 5. Will he end up staying with Sky Sports or going back to Hennessy on Channel 5? Don't know. But it's interesting that you start to see people move between platforms. Liam Smith, he's signed with Sky Sports and with Boxer. He's gone from DAZN, where he'd had the Anthony Fowler fight and the Vargas fight not too long back. Gone and signed with Boxer and back on Sky Sports, where he's fought for a lot of his career as well. It'd be nice to see, I think, Liam Smith, as he kind of approaches the tail end of his career. And I know, to be fair, he looks like he's been at the tail end of his career for a long time with the grey hair, but he hasn't. He's still going strong. He's still a formidable fighter. Be interesting to see if they do use him now as a main event, because Sky Sports need that headline talent, almost like an older talisman of the sport, to help bring through some of the younger lads. It'd be interesting to see if they can do that with Liam Smith, use him as the headline attraction and let others build up on his undercards. The obvious fight there would be Chris Eubank. If they were to do that in middleweight, I don't see Eubank coming down to light middleweight. Whether we get to see Liam Smith against Chris Eubank in the future, I hope so. Oh, what a fight that would be. I do hope we get to see that. No issue with that fight whatsoever. File that alongside your Chris Billam-Smith versus Isaac Chamberlain, all British fights that would really mean something. And that's the difference between that and Chisora versus Pulev. All British fights that really mean something, Chisora versus Pulev. They're on different scales. I wouldn't mind seeing Chisora in with some of the up-and-coming talent that's coming through in the UK scene. a Daniel Dubois. I wouldn't mind seeing that. I wouldn't mind seeing Fabio Wardley. I wouldn't mind seeing Nathan Gorman. Those kind of names in with Derek Chisora. Those work fine for me as fights. Just to see where those fighters are at, and then less punish him for Chisora. In the long run, I don't think he can take too many of these fights, but give him those ones. Or Joe Joyce. Joe Joyce and Derek Chisora are fighting 1 week apart from one another. 1 week apart. In London. Both of them fighting in London. And yet they're not fighting each other. One's fighting Pulev and one's fighting Christian Hammer. Those two, to me, it would make sense if they just fought one another rather than fighting opponents that people don't really need to see or care to see. Give Joe Joyce, that up-and-coming fighter, the old guard in Derek Chisora. That would make far more sense to me rather than having them fighting people that there's just not that much interest. It doesn't drive that much passion. And it also raised the question, again, we go back to Chisora and his losing 3 of the last 3. He's got the 12 losses on his record. He's taken some heavy beatings over the year. We go back to that Dillian White knockout that he had. That was a real bad one. Thankfully, he was okay after it. We go all those years back to the Tyson Fury, the second fight, where it was a bit of a sustained beating, the damage that he took. It wasn't, and you think back to that fight, it wasn't that he took heavy punches. He just took a sustained beating during the fight. The David Haye one, that was probably more heavy shots rather than the sustained ones. And these are going back a number of years. Since then, he's fought the likes of, there was the Dillian White 1 fight. Then he had the rematch where he got knocked out. He's had those tough, grueling Joseph Parker fights. He's fought Klitschko. He's fought Pulev once. About to fight him again. These kind of fighters, as fans, we kind of, when we see fighters towards the tail end of their career or within retirement, starting to suffer a little bit after the time. I'm not saying Chisora is, but I just think as fans, are we almost encouraging fighters to go on too long, too far? Is it fair to say that fighters go on too far or too long? It's their careers, it's their bodies, it's their brains, ultimately. It's their choice. As promoters, should there be some form of duty of care that's given to fighters? Now, the board will, of course, put them through their medicals once a year. They'll have their brain scan, they'll have their medical. I know, I've seen fighters deteriorate mentally, yet still pass those brain scans. Fighters that I am convinced within 10 years will have or show serious signs of deterioration, should they be brain scanned at that point, or within their speech, the slurred speech. I know fighters like that. So just to say that they're passing their medicals, to me, isn't sufficient. There needs to be a duty of care to fighters. You see it this weekend, Andrew Fairley organising a fire walk for boxers, for Ringside Rest Care Home, raising money to try and give boxers a place to go after they retire, those that suffer with physical and mental health problems. Brilliant cause, brilliant charity. If you get an opportunity, it's happening down in Portsmouth, go and support it. As a sport, we need to support boxers more, and that means giving them an escape route from the sport, supporting them out of the sport, not allowing them to go on for too long. As I say, I'm not citing Derek Chisora as somebody who has those issues, has those problems, but if in 20 years' time he did, as fans, as promoters, as the board, as broadcasters, they've all got a responsibility. They've all got a responsibility were that to happen, because Derek Chisora has been encouraged to go on for this long. And yes, he's still making money. It's his choice. But should that choice always be there? There are others. Derek Chisora is just one that I use because he's fighting this weekend. He's been, a long and hard career. He's given us all enjoyable and memorable nights. Has it gone on too long? Possibly. For me, yes. As I say, I've seen other fighters that you can see that deterioration in how they act, how they speak, how they talk. It's not always comfortable to look at. I'd hate to see that with Chisora. I think there is a welfare issue that should be addressed within the sport. And I think that needs to be driven by the Boxing Board of Control as well. Combined age, 79, these two fighters, it's not for me. Not for me, really. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting weekend. as I say, I'll still end up watching it, and that makes me as culpable as anyone else. But purely because we're almost starved of the real main events in the UK at the moment. So I do look forward to Chris Billam-Smith versus Isaac Chamberlain. I do look forward, hopefully, to Liam Smith versus Chris Eubank Jr. But otherwise, there's not an awful lot going on in the UK boxing scene right now. So let's hope we get to see some more in the near future. That's me signing off. Download the Pitch Boxing app. I'll be there on Saturday night, I'm sure, to watch along with Chisora versus Pulev. And I might be looking through my hands, wondering what I'm watching. Enjoy.